All right, we can hear you now,
Jack
Jack.
O'Halloran in the building.
How are you doing tonight, sir? Thanks for joining us.
I'm doing the best I can, whatever they'll let me get away with.
Always good to hear.
Well, we really appreciate you joining us this week. Matt has dropped a few nuggets of information that has us all very excited to do this interview tonight. So we appreciate it, Jack.
My pleasure, I'm sure. Who's baking the cookies?
So
I already ate them all, as you can see.
I figured that. I had you zeroed in. See?
Lord.
So you started playing sports at a young age. You started playing football and then moved to boxing. Became a heavyweight fighter, and you took on the likes of Cleveland Williams, Manuel Ramos, and even fought against George Foreman, right?
Yeah.
And you were supposed to have a couple of fights against Muhammad Ali that never worked out. Can you go through your career as a fighter and kind of what led you from that to acting?
I wanted to play football. Then it was a time when you couldn't play until your class graduated college. They didn't have hardship cases in the 60s. So you had to wait till your class graduated before you could play. And I came out of school early, and the Jets grabbed me, and they had like farm teams, like for baseball, they had it for football on the East Coast, and we had a team down at Tinicum outside of Philadelphia. Dick Christie and Jimmy Christie played on, and a couple other guys who played pro ball, some pretty good ball players, waiting to go up into the pros. And when it came time to play, Philadelphia had a great team, and Jurgensen was down there, Tommy McDonald and all. And I said to Eubank, I think I'd like to get out of Philly and play a little bit. And they said, well, you always have a home here. So go down and give it a whip. And Jerry Wallman bought the team, and he hired some clown named Joe Q. Harrick. And he traded a championship football team with this guy, like in 3 months' time. Jurgensen was gone, McDonald was gone. Traded 4 great linemen, young kids, to Green Bay for a retired Jim Ringo. Just crazy shit, boy. And Timmy Brown and I came out of a meeting one day, and when he walked right by us like we weren't even there, and I said, "Yo, don't you ever talk to people?" I said, "You know what? Take this team and stick it up your ass." And Timmy said, "While you're at it, trade me." And Muhammad had just won the title, and I said to some people, I can beat that guy. Next thing I know, I'm in the gym,
Great story start just like that.
Yeah. I couldn't box amateur because I was already considered a professional athlete, and in those days you couldn't do both. Today you could get away with that. You could be a pro in one sport and run track in the Olympics or whatever. You can't do that back in the 60s. So,
wow.
So it all was fun and games, and then when I was like 16-0 or 17-0, and they found that I had a disease called acromegaly, which is a tumor of the pituitary gland. And they said, you shouldn't even be fighting. And I said, yeah, right. And, and then I was involved in my father's business from New York. And so the boxing was like a day game, something to keep the law away from you.
I get that.
I would really love to get into that a little bit. For people that don't know, cue everybody in on your family and your upbringing.
My father was a man called Albert Anastasia, who was one of the primo dons of the country. He ran a little company called Murder Incorporated. He was partners with Meyer Lansky and Costello and Charlie Luciana and a few other good people. So he was, and they assassinated him in '57 because he wouldn't go in the drug business, and he controlled all the harbors. And he said, "You're not bringing that shit through my harbors. It just ain't going to happen." And we didn't sign up for that. And The Godfather, where Brando was offered the drug business, and said, he turned it down because it would be the downfall of the families. That's what my father said. He
And
said, our children will touch it and it will be the downfall of the families.
And your father was 100% right.
Yeah, he was. No, he definitely was. And they tried to tell him, well, it's only business. And he said, it's not a good business that we should be in. So,
You
and then
recently,
after they whacked him, they came to me when I was a kid. He said it was the worst thing they ever did because he was the glue that held them together. After Albert died, it all fell apart, started falling apart.
Wow.
You wrote a book about all this. What's the name of your book?
Family Legacy.
Family Legacy. And when did that book come out?
It's already out. It's quite a good book. We're getting ready. I got 3 more coming, and then I have a partner of mine, Charlie Luciano's son, and he's got his father's book, The Last Testament of Charles Luciano, Lucky Luciano. And we're going to incorporate some stuff and do a mini series and then a series. And series it'll make The Godfather, it'll make Sopranos and Boardwalk look like Child's Game.
Well,
I got fun.
I got to be honest. I've been listening to a podcast lately that I've been listening to a lot to, and I don't think that there's very many other people talking about your life, basically what you grew up doing. And I've been listening lately to a podcast called The Hollywood Godfather with Gianni Russo, who was in the Godfather movie. Yeah, and just hearing about that history is something that I think we always hear from one side.
That's the whole 9 yards. You have to. What people don't really understand is if you go back to the beginning, government, industry, organized crime, and unions were all partners.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And all the illicit monies that they made in the beginning, they put back into the growth of a country.
Yeah.
They hired. My father controlled the waterfront. And they had the construction companies, and they invested in General Electric, and they created jobs because their mainstay in the beginning was gambling, loan sharking, and extortion. And if you didn't have money, how could you pay them? So they made sure you went to work. So they were actually helping the growth of a country in a lot of ways. And it was all good until the Kennedy era, and then things started going downhill.
Well, that's actually the exact area that I want to talk about with you, because you have some thoughts on the whole Kennedy era and what happened to Kennedy, and I would love to get into that. I don't know if we have enough time to get into all of it, but
it's a kind of a simple deal. If you were going to say single out one person that was responsible for Jack Kennedy's death, you got to look at his father.
Yep.
Because his father angered a bunch of people. I mean, he made a lot of people very angry. And it goes back to the Prohibition era when it all started. When he was married to Rose Fitzgerald, whose father was Honey Fitzgerald, who was a gangster from Ireland, but he was the first senator of Massachusetts. And he controlled the bank there. He controlled the harbor there. He was a powerful guy in his own right, And Joe Kennedy was the youngest bank president in the country's history. Very, very smart guy. There's no 2 ways about how smart he was. And so he married Rose Fitzgerald, and then he had a warehouse up in Canada, and there's a guy down in Newark, New Jersey, Zillman's guy was head of Fleischmann's Liquor. And they got together and they ran booze out of Canada into America. And there was a load of booze coming down, and they should have stuck just with New Jersey, New York, and the East Coast. But Joe Kennedy was a bit greedy. And they were bringing a load of booze down that was supposed to go to a crew called the Purple Gang. And he hijacked it. And they said, you're a dead man, sonny boy. And if they told you were dead, you were in trouble. They were serious people. So he ran home to his father-in-law, and his father-in-law said, I can't help you with those guys. You're going to have to go to Chicago and sit down with Joe Esposito, who was the first Don out there.
Mm-hmm.
And Esposito said, you know what, kid? You're a very good earner. You go back to Boston. I'll take care of the Purple Gang, but you belong to us out here now.
You owe me.
And they put him under thumb. And the only piece of property that Joe Kennedy ever put money into is the Mercantile Building downtown Chicago. They made him build that. And there was a club called the Hamilton Club, which was a political stronghold, like the New York Athletic Club was the Hamilton Club in Illinois, and the president and everybody used to hang out there. And in 1926, and Kennedy was sent to Hollywood. He, if you looked underneath the paperwork, RKO Studios, he put together their distribution deal with all the Jewish theater owners. That was the first real complex distribution studio deal ever done. And he was banging around. They introduced him to Randolph Hearst, and he was just that kind of guy, banging, socializing everywhere.
And Hollywood starlets.
Every one of them that walked down the street. He was a male whore.
Yeah.
And he, in 1926, America was, after World War I, we became a war-bearing country. So we started to make war surplus materials. And we're taking jobs away from Europe. And Europe was getting a little bit ticked off because they were the ones who financed the country originally. And they claimed they weren't getting their money back and this and that. So the guys at the Hamilton Club sat Joe down and said, listen, we want you to try something for us. And he did a short sell on Pathé Newsreel, and he stole $5 million in broad daylight. And no one ever said a word about it. And they said, that's very, very good. Now, this is what we really want you to do. And he orchestrated a short sale against 30 companies in Europe, one of them being a company that Blackjack Bouvier, who was Jackie Kennedy's father, and her uncle and his father owned. And it was a Rothschild company. And in fact, that's why he drank himself to death, the guy. They bankrupted his company. But they did this short sale in 1929, and it worked very well. And they did it for a week, and they made a lot of money, and they just plummeted. The market went up and down like crazy. They took off a couple of days, and they were coming back for the kill, and the crash happened because the country panicked because of the market going up and down. And it didn't bother those guys because they made a fortune. And they didn't do it to make the crash. It just happened as a remnant of it. So when the crash was over, then the president grabbed Kennedy and said, you did a great job. You did exactly what we wanted you to do. Now we want you to run the SEC and rewrite all the rules, because they knew Europe had to reinvest in the country, and they wanted them to do it under a new set of rules, and which he did. And in 1935, he did such a great job. Roosevelt said, you know what? Now we're going to send you to England, and you're going to be ambassador to England. And some people grabbed him in Chicago and said, when you go to Europe, we want to tie some strings with some people together. And Kennedy, we weren't in the war yet. And Kennedy went over and he sat down with the Shah of Iran, who was a gangster, and they put a bank together, and he lent money to Hitler. And then the money they lent to Hitler came back to the same crew, Ad Khashoggi, and bought weapons from him. And England turned around and said, whoa, you're lending money to our enemy. What the hell do you think you're doing? And he didn't care. He was making a lot of money.
Yeah,
as a matter of fact, they threw him out of the country.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, didn't they, the government, or he was doing everything he can to stop the country from going into the war because they were making so much money.
He was making a fortune for submarines. They were just all kinds of war surplus. And they sent him out of the country, and nobody ever said a word why he came home. He came home as Ambassador Joe Kennedy, because the Gore family in Indiana owned the newspapers on the East Coast. They never printed a bad word about it. And Hearst owned the papers on the West Coast. And all the radio stations were owned by Murchison from Texas. So no one ever said a word about why. And there was no television then. So they controlled everything very well. And he was Ambassador Joe Kennedy when he came home. And, and so he had, because of the crash, he owned all that land up and down the East Coast, with all those estates and everything. That's how he got everything. And he decided he was going to run his son for president, and he wanted his first son to run for president.
Yeah, I do.
But what they did to him was his first son was 10 days from getting out of the service. He was already mustering out, and they were building a plane, like a kamikaze plane, to fly into the German munition factories to put an end to the war. And they convinced him to test pilot the plane. And he was a great pilot, the kid. And he thought that was a great honor. And he took the plane up, and the plane, boop, poof, you're a pile of shit. And he was dead, And a week later, they scrapped the whole deal. They never even went forward with it. So they killed his first son.
Which crippled him mentally.
Oh, it just blew him away because he was a real good kid.
And he was
when Jack was going to run for president, they grabbed him and they said, well, what are you going to do with this boy, Bobby? And they said, oh, no, Bobby, we're going to make him ambassador to Ireland. And we'll get him out of the way because Bobby was already being a pain in the ass.
Yeah.
With different committees and once Jack was named president, he told him to name his son. He said, put Bobby as attorney general. And he told Bobby, put all my good friends in jail. And they went after Giancana. He went after New York. They went after everybody.
Yep.
And, it was a whole game changer, and what they did was what people don't really know, if they really look it up and read well, Jack Kennedy would never lived out his term. He was dying. He was dying of Addison's disease. He had 4 diseases, and syphilis being one of them, actually. And they were shooting him up every day. The doctor shot him up every day.
Yep.
So he could walk around. But his father would have rather seen him die the way he died than die with a medical problem and put a mark on the family. And people say, well, man, that's awful cruel and cold-hearted. And I say, yeah, well, look what he did to his daughter.
Yeah.
He lobotomized his daughter because she had ADD and nobody had any cure or understanding of that. And he was afraid she was going to get crazy at some big function and dance on a table or something. So he lobotomized her. She sat in an institution all her life.
Yep.
Looking out a window.
Yep.
So he was not the nicest man in the world. In fact, he got his just due when he took his stroke. His wife used to beat the shit out of him every day. Really, Rose did. She used to punch him and bang him. Oh, man.
That was her chance.
Wow. Oh, that's why he couldn't move.
Yeah.
he was at her disposal, but he was just when Jack got killed, people said, who was the number one cop in the country? And everybody said, well, Hoover. It wasn't Hoover. It was Bobby. He was the attorney general.
Yep.
And 4 people went to see him, including Adlai Stevenson, and said to him, do not let Jack go to Texas. The animosity is horrendous. And here he is going in an open car. And they took him 4 months to reroute that thing down Dealey Plaza to get it where they wanted it. To perform this task. And here's an open car going down Dealey Plaza with the Bird Building, the book depository, open windows, people walking around with the president below you in an open car. Should have never, ever, ever been. And Bobby, who was his second skin his whole career, didn't go before, wasn't there during, and never went afterwards because they knew he wasn't coming home.
It was a setup from the get-go.
It was a sad, state of affairs, but and Jack was shot that day 3 times, and no one ever talked about that either. He was shot first in the throat. Johnny Roselli was in the cauldron in the street and shot him and hit him in the throat. Conley was shot first. There were 13 shots fired then. Conley got shot first. Jack fell on top of him. Then he got shot in his lower back that they never talked about. And then the driver took the last shot and blew his, when you see his head go flying back, and the back of his head came out. Well, if his back of his head wasn't going to come out if he got shot by Oswald from a window behind him. That's, Oswald wasn't even in the building. And there was a police station right across the street, and these guys were looking right in that building. There was 3 people in the window, 2 dark complected, which were Cubans, and another guy. No Oswald. You understand? And if anybody would tell you, if you're any knowledge of weapons, that was what Oswald, the rifle that he ordered was a mail order rifle, bolt action. Yeah. So if you're a shooter and you're taking a shot of 1,000 feet or better, and you have wind problems and signs and a car moving in a decline and trees and all these elements involved. And first of all, you have to arrest your heart because your pulse is in your finger. So you're 60 seconds arresting your heart and taking in all the elements that you got to do to make a shot. And then you're going to tell somebody that you did 4 shots in 28 seconds with a bolt action rifle? Please give me a break. Yeah. Never happened.
Nope.
So I've heard the media.
I've heard rumors that or stories that the mob had multiple shooters up and down the whole exit route as far away as 20, 30 miles.
First of all, the mob didn't orchestrate the hit.
Okay.
And that's all fallacy.
Okay.
The hit was orchestrated by one guy,
Joseph Kennedy,
and it was his first job in America. And he was a notorious guy called the Jackal. And he was
I've heard of
him. I did a movie about him. The Jackal, he was a hell of a guy. I met him a couple times. He was a good guy. He lived in South America. In fact, he's supposed to be sitting in jail right now in France, and he's not. Some guy's doing the time. He's down at his father's ranch down in South America. But that was the first job he ever did in America. And he was the most clever guy as far as a hitter. He never talked on the phone. He never wrote any letters. And when he traveled as a priest. And he stayed in parishes. And when you talked to him, you went into a confessional. So no one ever saw his face. You know what I mean? And they would put $20 million. They'd put $20 million in a bank account. He would take care of the business. And Bob's your uncle, So he orchestrated the thing in Dallas. And they had so many elements. The CIA was mad because of the Bay of Pigs. The mafia was mad because of a bunch of things. The oil guys in Texas were mad because when Jack was running for president and they had the nominations in California, H.L. Hunt came out with a basket full of money, gave it to Joe Kennedy for them to run Johnson as vice president. And as soon as Jack was named president, his father said to him, all those guys down there in Texas, those oil guys, they're making a fortune on what you call surplus oil, and there's no tax on it. You got to levy a tax on these guys. So they levied a tax on them, and that cost those guys like $200-300 million a year. You think they weren't a little bit unhappy?
But they were a lot unhappy.
So there was a bunch of people and the CIA was, all those kids got killed in the Bay of Pigs because Joe Kennedy told his son, those guys don't need any bullets in their guns because you don't want anybody to make a mistake of shooting a gun off and creating an incident. And they got slaughtered. They just got shot down like ducks in the water. So there were some people not too happy.
Have you ever heard the stories of the deathbed confession by E. Howard Hunt and the
guy that drove the car? His son went on the Jesse Ventura's show.
Yeah.
And he had an affidavit from his father.
It was unbelievable. You can actually go listen to the deathbed confession where E. Howard Hunt, who is one of the most powerful men in the country from, the day he died and from the 60s or earlier till the day he died, to talk about exactly what happened. And it's mind blowing. Do you think that a lot of that is based in truth?
Yeah. No. H.L. Hunt was a trip, boy.
Yeah.
He was. You got to understand where everybody thought he was Texas born. He wasn't. He was born in Chicago, and he went from Chicago to Los Angeles, down to New Orleans, and he was a card shark. He was only 14, 15 years old, and he won a lot of oil leases in a card game down in Texas, and he was one of the biggest owners of that big oil field, the first one they hit oil on. There were 4 of them. There were Sid Richardson himself and George and Herman Brown, which was Brown Root. George and Herman Brown wrote every check for every Texas president. I don't know if you know who Brown Root was. Today it's Halliburton. Brown Root. George and Herman Brown owned a shipbuilding place in the Houston Harbor, And in 1938, they were given the contract to build warships for America. So by 1939, 1940, these guys had like $800 million, which was a lot of money in those days. And there was a guy in Austin, Texas, who had power of the pen for all the federal buildings and naval bases and army bases, and Brown Root did all the building, built federal buildings and all that stuff. So they made a fortune, you know.
Making money.
Nobody ever talks about that.
No.
You know, and they wrote the checks for George Bush. They wrote the checks for Johnson. You know, they supported all the Texas. In 1960, Texas had 4 of the wealthiest men in the world. They could have seceded from America and become their own state. You know, they had the wealthiest guy down there. You hear about his son, but never him. Was old man Murchison, Clint Murchison's father. Clint Murchison Jr. owned the Cowboys and the stadium they played in, but his father was the guy who had the bread, man. He was like a recluse. You never saw him. When they built the Long Island Railroad, everyone thought Rockefeller put up the money. Murchison did. Murchison put up the money for the Long Island Railroad when they were building the country. So he was a big time Mason.
I've heard a lot of people explain it as like the octopus because it has so many tentacles you can't.
Well, that was the name of the CIA, correct? It was called the Octopus Movement. That was the name of the deal. I feel like it's gotten so many different stories over the time. Well, you've got conspiracies, but nobody goes into a library and looks anything up. It's all there in books.
I reckon
nobody reads right. Everybody listen to the media. I mean, the whole Warren Commission was bullshit.
Yep,
it was total bullshit. When they locked up Jack Ruby, and the Warren Commission went to question him, and Ruby said, "Well, I guess you guys want to talk to me about Chicago because that's where he was from."
Yeah.
And they said, "No, we don't care about Chicago." And Ruby said, "Well, you can't talk to me here, or I'm a dead man. You got to move me somewhere. If you want to talk to me, you got to take me somewhere." And they didn't. They put him in jail, and they took a needle from Tulane University, which had a cancer research laboratory, and boom, 6 months later, he's a dead man.
Yep.
So
wow.
nobody looks at the truth of the matter. And when you see Ruby come into that underground deal when they brought Oswald out, and the guy beside him stepped away from him because he knew he was about to get shot. You know?
Yeah.
And then when you look at the whole interviews of when they locked Oswald up, they never took a note, never recorded a conversation. Nothing of his interrogation was ever documented, and no one ever felt that was strange. You know?
Yeah, because they saw him. He killed the president, quote unquote.
Yeah, I mean, they say, why doesn't Hoover get involved in this? The FBI, and they said, oh no, it's a one-man deal. It's not a conspiracy. You know, it's all bullshit.
So one quick question about this whole thing, this Kenny thing. When you, a personal question for you, when this was happening and going down real life, did you have any idea or any thoughts about it was there was something going on at the time?
I was in Dallas the night before at the party at Murchison's house.
Wow. I
was sent down there by Myron Lansky. I went down there on the premise I was going to play ball for Dallas Cowboys.
Wow.
Murchison owned the team.
Yep.
And I met McCoy, who was a huge banking guy, man. And he lived in Connecticut. And I met a lot of people. That's what I was sent there for, to learn. And I saw Johnson come in from Fort Worth when he went over to see Jack Kennedy when he flew in Dallas to the Fort Worth airport. And he came in, and then the whole group of them went into a room afterwards, and we left. We guys said, we're done, let's go. And next morning I was out running with Johnny Roselli. I saw Roselli there before I left, and the whole thing was orchestrated to the letter.
Yeah.
And it was done so well that you have 100 conspiracy theories And everybody talks this bullshit. And everybody talks, and every 10 years, something new comes out. It took 10 years before they ever talked about him getting shot in his back. And it took, when you get Zapruder, did you ever see the Zapruder footage?
Oh, yeah.
Well, the original Zapruder footage had 8 frames deleted from it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was the driver turning around and shooting. Well, I had those frames for a long time. Then the FBI they put it all together. Now it's been on YouTube because somebody from NSA was going to do it. So the FBI did it. And the frames are included now. You can see the driver turn and take the last shot. And nobody said anything about that. When you see the Zapruder footage and you're watching them come down Dealey Plaza, the Secret Service guys peeled away from Kennedy's car and walked to the car behind them. And then they all had to run up to the car when all the shots started because they didn't feel like getting shot, being in the way of anything. So
yeah. Well,
Jackie was climbing, trying to get out of the car. And they said, oh, no, she was trying to scrape his brains. That's bullshit. She thought they were killing her next.
Yeah.
She tried to get out of the car, and they grabbed her, and they told her, whispered right in her ear, if you say one word about what you just witnessed, because they know she saw Greer shoot him, we'll kill your kids. And she never opened her mouth.
Yeah, she went into hiding, basically.
Never opened her mouth, and she lived with the jeweler, and she was going to write a book. She had an amazing diary, and when she died, her son grabbed the diary. He owned George Magazine. Then he was coming to Hollywood to make a deal, and they killed him in the plane.
Yep.
So and this is all this stuff is it's there, but nobody. I mean, Zapruder never in his life held a camera in his hand before, and he suffered from vertigo. And here he is up high, 2 women holding his legs. And all these gunshots going on. He never took his finger off that camera because the film was sold to Life magazine for $150,000 before it was ever shot. Wow. And no one saw it for a year.
Wow.
Processed right in Murchison's lab in Dallas. That's where the 4 frames were taken out of it.
Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. This is fascinating to me. Make sure you guys, all the viewers who are watching, go check out Jack's book. What's the name of your book, Jack?
Family Legacy.
Family Legacy. Make sure you guys go check out Family Legacy.
Yeah, if you go to familylegacythenovel.com, takes you right to Amazon, gives you the history of it, the whole 9 yards.
How did you get involved in acting?
They can't, when I was boxing in 1966 when I first started fighting, and I had my first few fights in Philly, and we had a club there that Jerry Woolman owned. It was in the Sheraton Hotel where he bought that whole building and all the Eagles lived there. We all had apartments there and shit. And had this great disco on the ground floor. And we were the bouncers at night because it was a paycheck. And there was a big rhubarb, something happened there. And I wound up outside with 6 or 7 people and a few shots were fired at people. And so they got me out of town. So because I was undefeated as a fighter, and they put me on a train and sent me to Boston. And I was up in Boston, and Steve McQueen was doing Thomas Crown Affair.
Yeah.
And we looked after him when he came into Boston, and he and I became really good friends. And he said to me, man, come down. He said, I'm going to put you in the movie and come to Hollywood, man. We'll have a ball. But Steve was a great kid.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't think so, man. I said, he said, no, you got to do this. To hell with this fighting shit. He said, come to Hollywood, man. And I said no. Then in 1969, I knocked out Manuel Ramos, who was ranked 2nd in the world. And I'm looking for an Ali fight with Raymond Patriarca and some people from the East Coast put together the deal for me to do the Great White Hope with James Earl Jones.
Mm-hmm.
And they flew me out to California. I met the producer. And I was supposed to just walk in and sign a contract. And I'm saying to the guy, well, hold on a minute. You want me to go to Spain for 6 months? I just knocked out the number 2 ranked heavyweight in the world, and I'm looking at a shot at Ali, and you want me to leave? They said, well, I thought the deal was all done. You're just supposed to sign the contract. And I turned it down. And Eddie Foy had put the deal together. He said, you're going to get me killed. I said, don't worry about it. I'll take care of it. And I'm leaving Fox, and I'm walking out, and James Earl Jones is coming up the steps, and he stopped me. He said, you're Jack O'Halloran. I said, yeah, you're James Earl Jones. Isn't that amazing? He said, I got to ask you a question. Is it true what I just heard about you? This is how fast stories go around. True what I just heard about you? I said, well, it depends on what you heard. He said, you just told Hollywood to take the biggest movie that they're making right now and stick it. I said, well, I guess you could say that. He said, I got to shake your hand. Never met anybody done that before. And we became friends. And then McQueen called me on the phone. He said, what are you doing? Blah, blah, blah. And then he did a picture called Towering Inferno. And his name was Captain O'Halloran. And he called me up. He said, didn't you like your name up on the screen? Blah, blah, you know. So when I retired from boxing, and they offered me Farewell, My Lovely with Robert Mitchum, and they flew me out to California to do a screen test, and Mitchum said it's either him or I don't do the movie. So I blame it all on Robert Mitchum.
What was it like with Robert Mitchum? That guy was like,
oh, he was great. He was like a father. He was, if you ever had to have a mentor in your life to do something, Robert was the guy. Robert was a street guy. I mean, he was the most underrated actor in Hollywood.
yes,
He was probably the most well-read man I ever met in my life. He had an amazing memory capacity. He was, I'll tell you a great story about him. Mitchum, he lived in Maryland. He owned quarter horses. He won the Rio Doza a couple times, which is the biggest quarter horse race in the country.
Yep.
And he lived in Maryland. He was down the street from the White House, so he was like the resident movie star. Whenever they needed an actor and he was home, he would go up to have dinner, all that jazz. So he gets a phone call one day, and he said, Mr. Mitchum, we'd like you to come and have this dinner. And he didn't think anything of it. He said, yeah, well, why not? So he goes up, and he said, I was the only non-military guy at the dinner. All these guys were military guys and congressmen, all involved in the Vietnam War. And after dinner, he's having a conversation with these people. And this one guy speaks up to him and says, Robert, he said, what do you know about Vietnam? And he said, I was just about to bullshit them, because he could do that because he read everything under the sun. And he said, I didn't. I said, I don't know anything. And he said, don't you think it's about time you learn? So he didn't think a thing of it. He went home, never thought it. And all of a sudden he gets a letter in the mail. And when he was in the Army, they asked him to leave because he was always smoking pot and just, he was always in the brig and shit, So he like went out below and buck private, man. They asked him to leave. So he gets a letter, and they reinstate him back into the service at level of a colonel. And he's gone over doing his reconnaissance in a helicopter because he was looking at things and writing out reports on things that he saw, and because he had this great thought process, right? And he's doing this for about a month, 2 months, and all of a sudden he's off there and they're shooting at him. And he said, this is no good. And so he gave some calls that they got sent home. And he's home about a month. And he gets a phone call from Howard Hughes, who he was very close to. And Howard Hughes, and all Howard Hughes said to him was, do you know about Vietnam now, Robert? He put the whole thing together. He said, and I said to him, was the guy? He said, Jack, he was an incredible guy. He said, because he used to go down to RKO. When Howard Hughes bought RKO, Mitchum would go down and sit with him at night, and they'd talk about production and stuff. And he said, and Howard was always reaching for the phone before it rang. And he said, this is bullshit. I'm going to catch this guy up. So he gets a guy outside. He gives him a couple of nickels and the phone number. And he tells him to call the number at a certain time. And he's sitting there rabbiting with Howard Hughes. He looks at his watch and he's waiting. And before the phone even rang, Howard Hughes reached for the phone and looked at Mitchum and said, why is this guy calling you here this time of night? I said, well, I guess you figured out he was psychic, huh? He said, son of a bitch. So he said he wanted Howard Hughes wanted him to run RKO Studios. And he said, Howard, I'd have to get up before the actors. I don't think it'll work. But he was great. He was, when I went to work, I had never been on a movie set before. And he arranged for us to drive down in the same car. He lived up around the corner from where I was staying at. And they picked him up, and they came and picked me up. And he's in the lobby he has sunglasses on and a windbreaker, and he's got his foot up against the wall. And I come bouncing out through these glass doors, and nobody recognized him, because that's the way he was, like always, like he was incognito. And I come bouncing down the steps, and he looked at me and said, "This must be Jackie O." And we became great. I mean, he was great. He just told me exactly what I needed to do. And
I grew up in a household that relished those old school movie stars, and I've been a fan of Golden Age movie stars. I know they call it the Golden Age, but it definitely truly was. I mean, the Hollywood during those times seemed magical from a person that was standing outside of it.
Well, you had the actors were different than these kids today, you know.
Yeah.
And I remember the first shot I ever did. The first shot I was, you know, we got there to set, we got dressed, and standing at the bottom of the steps. I don't know if you ever see Farewell, My Lovely.
Yes.
It's a great movie. Well, when we walk up into that bar, in the beginning we walk up to the bar, we're looking for Velma, and we're standing at the bottom of the steps, and Mitchum looked at me. He said, "Well, have you read that script, kid?" I said, "Read it." I said, "I know your role, Charlotte's role, and everybody from base." He said, "Good, throw it in the trash." I said, "What?" He said, "Don't let me catch you doing like thousands of people here acting. Just take that character, put yourself in his pants, and walk down the street like you, and be yourself." He said, "You've been a gangster all your life, and you're playing a gangster, so it'd be a cakewalk for you." And so we went up and did the very first shot, and they were moving the cameras around and everything. And I said, "What's the deal? What's going on?" He said, "You really don't know." I said, "I'm asking you a question." He said, "That's it, kid. That's the whole enchilada." I said, "Are you kidding me? That's all there is to this shit?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Man, I'm a star." That became like a tagline for the film, you know. So and he said, I asked him, I said, "What is the definition of a star?" He said, "It's very simple, kid. It's a word called presence.
Yes.
Some people have it on the screen and other people don't.
Mhm.
And they can't teach it to you. You either have it or you don't." And I just was lucky enough that I had this presence, and, you know, and he said, "The camera loves you or it doesn't love you, point blank." And he taught me how to look right through the camera. Don't even look at it, but it'll find you. And he was right. You know, he said, "You know, you look at a picture like Brando does, or I do, or Gregory Peck, and no matter what movie they do, no matter what role they play, when people come out of the theater and say, 'Oh man, wasn't Marlon great when he did this?' Or wasn't Gregory great when he did that?" And then you get an actor like Bill Holden, who was a pretty good actor, but people walk out of a theater and they say, boy, that guy really, what was his name?"
Yeah.
They just don't have that presence, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And some people have it, some people don't. And it's just one of them things, like I said, they can't teach you in any acting school. It's just there. You either do or you don't.
Yep.
So
Well-
it worked out pretty well. Farewell was a great film. I was the first mistake I made in Hollywood. Mitchum set up a meeting for me and Johnny Carson, and I met him at the Polo Lounge. And he was going to, if I did his show, he would have got me nominated for supporting actor that year. And I said, "But your show is live, isn't it?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "Well, I don't think I can do it." He said, "What?" I said, "Well," I said, "You know, I'll come on the stage. You're going to ask me about my father, and I'll ask you where the men's room's at." He said, "You'd get up and leave?" I said, "Yeah, I don't allow people to talk about my father. I don't talk about that side of my life." And he said, "Well, no, we'll rearrange the questions. We'll make sure that we don't." I said, "John, you are the #1 news reporter in all of Hollywood.
John.
You have Albert Anastasia's son on your set, and you're not going to ask me about my father? Do I look like I fell off a turnip truck?" No disrespect, man, but, you know. And then Mitchum screamed at me. He said, "Are you crazy?" He said, "You dumbass." He said, "This is Hollywood. They love that shit. They eat it up. What, are you nuts or what? What's the matter with you?" And then it dawned on me that he was telling everybody anyway. About me. I said, "Oh, man." So, that was the first mistake I did.
So there's another story that comes out of Farewell, My Lovely, with the one Sylvester Stallone, and there's a little urban legend out there that you might be able to put to bed that you are actually the basis for Rocky.
That was the truth. That was my life. I was the gangster in Philadelphia, and he'd never been to Philly. Well, he was there, I think, for a semester at school. His mother was married to a wise guy from Florida with a lot of money. Sly went to school in Switzerland. And when he was doing the script and he sat there, he picked my brain every day. I told him about the waterfront. I told him about the bookmakers. And the gym was a gym that we did in South Philly, past Yonk and Moore. We had to walk up these creepy old steps and shit. But some great fighters trained there. And then they used the Main Street gym downtown LA for the inside of the gym because it was a lot bigger than what we had. And but he had never, I mean, he didn't know anything about gangsters and shit like that in Philly and stuff. And he picked every day he picked my brain. So you see him in the morning when he was putting the eggs, raw eggs. That he got that from me. I do that still today.
Wow.
I did that every day of my life. 6 raw eggs I eat every day.
That statue should be you and not him.
Yeah, I was about to say, first class education on like a worldwide franchise right there.
But God bless him. That's all.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
That's so cool.
That's really cool.
I gotta jump to a movie or a franchise in general. Obviously, best known for Superman. I'm willing to profess, like, Superman 2, especially like the fight scenes, because 6-year-old Corbin loved that stuff. I watched again and again and again. And I, growing up and having a different perspective of your acting, I've heard that you basically put a lot of the character traits of Non, as far as him having like a childlike presence and being.
Well, that was the whole deal. When I flew, I was doing a picture with Hackman. We were doing March or Die down in Spain, and we flew up to meet Donner because they offered me the movie, and I flew up to sit down with Donner, and we're talking about the character, and Non was originally like a genius scientist that they lobotomized. He said, "So the guy is a mute. Do you mind playing?" And I said, "No," because Jackie Gleason was a friend of mine, and he did a picture called Gigo that he won an Oscar for. And I said, if I ever got a chance to play a character like that, where you're using body language and facial expression, I'm going to embrace it. And Non was a perfect character because Zod was a vicious general. Sarah was a man-eater. Somebody had to relate to the kids because it's a big child audience. So I said, I'm going to take this huge, brutish guy, and I'm going to play him like a child. Learning how to work his eyes and with the child mannerisms and stuff, adoring Zod and shit like that. And it worked. That came off pretty good.
Yeah, I was gonna say one of my favorite scenes was you where Zod, where they had entered that small town, and now practicing his heat vision on the barn and with one of the kids looking along.
Oh yeah. Besides the kid,
yeah, he was focused and was so proud when he did it. It was fun. What was it like working with members of the cast? Obviously, Christopher Reeves, but also like Terrence Stamp and Sarah Douglas. Terrence
is a brilliant English actor. I mean, the guy is renowned. And Sarah was young, but you could see she had a talent. She was gorgeous, and she had that ballsiness about her. So it worked out really well. And when you work with people for a couple of years, you become like a family. And working with Terrence and Sarah was a treat. I mean, and Brando was brilliant. I mean, there's some great actors in Superman. Even the people that played the judges and all. Trevor Howard, and a few real stalwart English actors. Maria Schell, European woman actor. Geez, they had some brilliant people in the picture. So it gelled. It really worked well, And Brando was Brando. He was a trip.
I feel like Gene Hackman is one of the stars of that film that doesn't get enough credit for his role in it. I mean, Gene Hackman in that role was
he was brilliant. Gene's a great actor. He's methodical. I mean, Gene really, when they fired Donner, Gene wouldn't come back, and I blame that on Christopher. Christopher should have stood up and said, "No, Donner, no me," and they would have had no choice. They didn't want to pay him. That was the problem. And the same as, how do you cut Marlon Brando out of a picture?
True.
Right.
And they cut him out of 2 because they didn't want to pay him. And they already paid him to do 1 and 2 for the footage, but they didn't want to pay him the points that he had, So, I mean, who cuts? And when you see the Donner cut's much better. I don't know if you ever
It's
saw the
amazing.
Donner cut.
Yeah.
And Brando's in through all that footage. It was already shot,
Mhm.
but you don't see with the Lester cut. Hackman never came back. He
No.
just, said nope. Thanks for no thanks.
And
So a lot of his stuff was back. It was behind. You see a guy from behind. A couple scenes, but most of they used the stuff that Donner shot of Hackman. What they put in there.
Oh, wow.
I've heard that, and through that whole shooting, that Christopher Reeves kind of walked around very arrogantly and like a new actor.
You gotta
And
understand something. You know, he was young. It was the first big movie he ever did. And he should kiss Donner's feet every day of the year because Donner got a performance out of him. You'll never see another Superman like that kid did. He did the Superman Clark Kent switch over brilliantly. And that was Richard Donner that did that. And when he first came on the set, he only weighed like 170 pounds. And they build him up. And when they were building him up, I talked to the guy who did Darth Vader. I forget his name. He was the bodybuilder. And I said, don't pump him. Cut him up like Steve Reeves, definition-wise, because he would never wear anything underneath the kid. So he wanted to mold his body to make it look like it was the natural. So he put on like he get up to 200 pounds, like 30 pounds of weight, but it was put on him properly. And he looked great. It just worked really, really well. I mean, he did the character, somebody just walked around like that all day. That was the problem.
Well, yeah, you guys almost came to blows, from what I understand. You almost lit him up, and Donner stepped in.
The story, the thing gets so blown out of proportion.
Set the record straight.
There was a restaurant in town, Italian restaurant in town, on Beecham Place, San Lorenzo, and they were friends of mine. It was the first Italian restaurant in London. So I used to eat dinner. I lived down the street at Connecticut Square, and I used to walk up and eat dinner there every night because a lot of friends of mine used to go there as well. And I used to tell all the people from the crew and everything, God, you guys got to come in. This restaurant's brilliant, because the food was brilliant. And it became a big paparazzi place. Diane used to go there and everybody. So everybody used to go in and have dinner in there. And Chris was in there one night with Hackman and a bunch of people. And he's talking about me and my father in New York and things he doesn't know anything he's talking about. And the owner of the restaurant called me on the phone and said, Jack, how well do you know this Christopher Reeve kid? And I said, well, what's the problem? He said, well, he's in there talking like he's a long-lost cousin of yours, talking about your exploits in the mafia and all this. I said, you shitting me? He said, no. So the next day I went to work and I grabbed him and I said, yeah, we need to have a conversation, Sonny. And I took him into a room. And I said to him, I said, how well do you think you know me, kid? Well, I just hear all these stories about you. I said, what gives you the right? To talk? And I told him, I said, the next time you mention my name, put Sir behind it. Understand that? And you ever talk about my father again, and, that's a bad idea. So we came to an understanding. And then as soon as we got in the hallway, went outside, he started this, you can't talk to me that way. And I said, whoa, wait a minute. Like he was Superman, And I grabbed him and I threw him against the wall. And I was just getting ready to whack him. And Donner jumped up in my ear. He said, not in the face, Jack. Don't hit him in the face. So I bucked out laughing. I just dropped him on the floor. You don't know how lucky you are, kid. And then you let it go. You just, because you got to work together for the rest of you. So it just, we never became the greatest of friends, but he was a friend. He was a good. You can't not be friends when you work like that on a film.
True. True. Wow, that's the story. What was your feeling about the direction as well? Once you had mentioned Donner and Superman franchise after that, were you also like, okay, this is a wrap as far as just the quality of it and being a part of that?
If Donner would have finished 2, he'd have done 3, 4, 5, and 6. Because he still does the comic books today. He loved the franchise. He and Mark Mankiewicz were just up over their ears with it, So they would have been a whole different franchise. Wow. And that's the sad part. Who got cheated was the fan base, and the Salkinds were just money whores. They didn't care. They just they made a lot of money, and they weren't looking at the future, you know, which you would think if they were real producers, they would have, you know, but. And Warner Brothers ought to be spanked as well because, you know, they were, and at that time they were like we were shooting 2. We really got into 2, and we had shot like 85% of it when we had to stop because you had to deliver 1, and he had to do some end shots with it, and Donner got hooked up into doing 2. So Saul kind of said, "Whoa, man, you gotta give it." So Warner Brothers came over to the studio and they said, "Well, you know, you guys are going to be late bringing it in." He said, "You know, maybe we don't pick up 2." And Saul kind said, "Well, does that mean that I can shop around for other distributors?" And they said, "Yeah, why not?" And they thought because he was asking for another $15 million, and he put a whole bunch of distributors in a theater, and I was sitting there. And he brought the fight scenes out and showed the fight scenes. Warner Brothers couldn't get the rubber bands off the money fast enough. You know, we broke technology rules with those shots. We did something that was never done before. That wasn't just CGI. We weren't on wires with that. We shot VistaVision on VistaVision. We're up on this big 70-foot screen with poles coming through the screen. And they shot us into the movie. That's why it looks so great flying under bridges and around buildings. And, you know, and the fight scenes were brilliant. My God, they were.
Yeah.
You know, that's why the movie stands up today. It's a great film.
I was going to say that's the best parts.
One of the scenes I have to ask about because I laugh every time I see it, and the cellophane S. Was there ever a time filming this movie when after Donner had exited,
that was
where
Lester's idea.
Yeah, where when Lester took over, that you were like, this is ridiculous. Like that.
Well, he was like a television actor. I mean, Lester did everything in the laboratory. And for instance, when they shot in Paris at the Eiffel Tower. Yeah. Mm-hmm. If you ever look at the film again, you'll look real look at it and those scenes because Margot's coming up and the cops, you know, she's trying to con the cop to get up the tower. Mm-hmm. And you see raindrops hitting the guy. It was pissing rain that day. You look at the cop car and the windshield wipers are going back and forth, but yet it looks sunny out in the film because Lester just went ahead and shot it, and then he went in the laboratory and boom, you know, cleaned it up, made it look like sunshine and stuff. And it was, but that was his way of doing things. He would make so many shots and cover shots, and he'd go in and in the editing room and he'd patch it together. Where Donner was on the money, boy. He was just.
And in that specific scene, you can kind of tell because I rewatched it recently, and when they're at the Eiffel Tower and the terrorists, the words don't fit the mouth, and when they're talking, so you can kind of see that it was cut over and re-edited.
Oh no, that's Richard Lester shit.
Yeah.
And look at when you see, if you ever see it again, look at the windscreen wipers on the cop car. They're going back and forth, and the cop's got spots on his shirt from the raindrops.
It's a shame because the quality definitely did drop dramatically after 2, which to my mind was like the pinnacle of it. I mean, 1 was solid, but I loved 2. I mean, after that, it was just.
Well, a lot of 2 was Donner, but Lester, for a director to put his name on a script on a film, you have to shoot 50% of it. Oh. So he had to come back, and which for us was great because we worked another year and a half or something, you know. But he had to come back and reshoot a lot of stuff. But then he interfaced Donner stuff, so to make 2 was a good movie, but too much comedy in it.
Yeah,
because they wanted to make it. They wanted to make it more campy, as the popularity of the Batman TV show with Adam West, if I'm correct, right?
Well, that's what if you watch the Donner cut, that's not there. It's a much
it was a lot more grounded, serious.
Yeah, much neater film. Yeah, it was.
Yeah, because I noticed that on rewatch that
it was great. They were great films.
I've noticed that a couple times on rewatches that, like you said, there's issues where like it's like audio is thrown in places where it doesn't look like it belongs, and kind of just the way that with the internet and people study film now, anybody can kind of pick that up nowadays. Just where you can kind of see what was kind of dubbed over. So
yeah, Yeah, you can if you're astute and you're watching it. But everybody gets caught up in the whole spectacular of Superman. So, and he was the first American superhero. So, and then when they after Superman 3 and 4 was diabolical. Then when they come out with what they're doing now, they changed the costume. They took away the all American way. They Superman all of a sudden starts killing people, and that shit should not have happened. So we're thinking of doing. We have an idea to do another Superman and change the franchise back to where we can bring Christopher back because of the technology today. With the hologram deal, we can bring Christopher Reeve back. And we have a great storyline to bring 3 villains and Christopher back.
That would be interesting.
Wow.
Yeah, that'd be very.
No, I got a great storyline. It really, really works well.
How familiar were you with the Superman character before you took the role and signed on to Superman 1? Did you kind of read the comics as a kid?
Well, I didn't know about Non at all. Everybody read Superman comics when you were a kid. I mean, that was, if you read any comics, they were like Star Pupil comics then. That was, like I said, the first superhero in American history was Superman.
So what kind of drew you to that role of Non then? Just that they kind of let you play him any way you could?
I was playing a mute guy that I could do what I wanted, that I could play him like a child. And I knew that was going to, and I had so many people. I remember the first Comic-Con I did it, people come up to me and they said, "My God, you can actually talk?" And then the kids would come up and they'd say to me, "Oh my God, your character frightened me so much, but I love the character. Oh my God," because it related to him like a child.
Mm-hmm.
So evidently what we did worked out pretty good.
Yeah.
Thank God.
So I'm sorry, Matt.
I was just gonna say I want to know how fun was it the day that you got to go in to shoot and they're like, all right, this is a scene where you get to just bust up the Daily Planet. You just get to blow through everything. Were you excited on that day?
I tell you that, I really had a good time with that because I did all my own stunts. And and when we walked through the wall, they had cut out parts of the thing, and the guy had a jack that it was supposed to explode it and everything, and the jack never went off. So I did all that with myself, just busted right through. And then the jack went off afterwards and hit me in the arm, and I never said a word. I just walked through the scene. And the guy the prop guy, he got white and he ran because it hit me in the arm. And he said, "Oh my God, he's going to kill me." I turned around and said, "Where is that kid?" And the guy said, "You can see the white of his ass running down the hallway." I think he went to lunch real early.
Yeah. So in any of your roles, obviously talking about some of the roles you've had, is there any that you particularly wanted to get and didn't? I know we referenced, I think, Jaws before, but any role that you, looking back, wish you had either accepted or looked into or considered?
Well, the Bond picture, I didn't like the character, and I didn't want to get into being just that big dumb guy all the time. You understand?
Mm-hmm.
And I just didn't. If it was Sean Connery doing Bond, I probably would have done the picture. There was a Burt Reynolds picture that I turned down, and I wish I didn't turn down. And there was a picture that I was doing King Kong, and they came to me to do a picture with Richard Pryor and Gene Wilder, the train robbery thing, and it was. And we had a couple weeks off while they were in New York, and I was sitting at the beach in Hermosa Beach, and I could have went 5-6 weeks up to Canada and shot this picture. And I wish I had done it. I should have done it because Paramount made me a great deal. If they would have done that, I had a great script that I wrote that they would have done, and I would have done a couple other pictures for them. And you become like a house actor and stuff. And I should have done it. Period. So I made a few mistakes in my career, but I generally picked stuff that I wanted to do, But there were a couple pictures that I wish I would have done, that I should have done.
That is interesting.
Did you take many of your roles based on the cast that you were working with, like the supporting cast, people you want to work with, like Tom Hanks and Dan Aykroyd and Dragnet? Or
When they offered, Mankiewicz did Dragnet, and when he offered me Dragnet, and Tom Hanks, that was his coming out of the picture. That was.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's a great kid, and Danny Aykroyd's a trip. I mean, you could watch Dragnet 50 times and still not get all the one-liners that he throws out. And I love the script. It was, I said, wow, this is going to be we'll have a good time doing this, and we did. And it was a nice little film. It was just like the one picture I did that should have gotten, but the AFCO embassy didn't have the money to promote it correctly, was the Baltimore Bullet. Because Jimmy Coburn and Omar Sharif was in it. It was Bruce Boxleitner's first picture. And we actually shot the 9-ball tournament on MGM's studio lot that year. So every pool hustler in the world was there. And Newman came down and watched us play and Jimmy Coburn was a pretty good pool shooter. So we had a lot of fun doing that in New Orleans. And Omar Sharif was a trip. He's another great actor, So I've been very fortunate in my career to work with some pretty good actors, Thank God.
Like Chuck Norris.
Yeah, Chuck, we did Hero and the Terror, and it was probably the best film that he ever did as an actor, And again, they ran it. They didn't have the money to promote that properly, because it was a pretty good little movie, Hero and the Terror. And that's another character that I did, that was played with facial expressions and stuff, because the guy was a mute guy. He didn't have a hell of a lot of dialogue, But I remember doing a scene where I was coming in the garage, walking down the track, and the woman I was with was sitting down there on the set, and I walked up and I turned around and came down in character and scared the shit. She said, "I don't think I could ever sleep with you again." My God, it scared the shit out of her. Because you fall into character and stuff. It was different, But yeah, I liked Hero and the Terror was a good picture for me. I mean, I had a lot of fun doing it, and Chuck was a good guy to work with.
So tell us a little bit about your time on the Flintstones film. You worked on the first Flintstone. You played Yeti, and
I'll tell you, that film really ticked me off because it's the first time I ever had any footage ever cut out of a movie, and they came to me to do a commercial for a hamburger joint because we did these great scenes at the gate with Rosie O'Donnell and all interfacing, and it was really worked out. They're really great scenes, and they cut them out to make room for Liz Taylor.
Oh,
Liz Taylor was in the picture, and the director was a schmuck. Anytime you get a guy that shoots 40-to-1 ratio, I mean, he made Lester look like a schoolboy. And that really ticked me off. So it wasn't a great big role, but it had some great scenes in it that made me want to do it, And John Goodman's a good kid. I liked him. It was, and it was a great, it could have been a much better movie than it was.
So I want to kind of circle back real quick to your book. You mentioned many times at the interview that you didn't like talking about your father, and you didn't like when people try to bring up your father. What kind of finally made you want to write that book?
Well, I sat down with a bunch of friends of mine, and I said, I'm tired of all the stories that threw us under the bus. Mm-hmm. And it's time to tell the truth because America really wants the truth. And if you ever read the reviews on Amazon of the book, you'll see some 90-year-old
They're fantastic.
guy.
Yeah,
this 90-year-old guy from New York wrote a great review. He said, this book is got so much truth in it, and all the characters' names are there, and all the stories from the New York newspapers are all real. He said, because I lived it. I was there. I lived it, and it was about time somebody told the truth. So it's time that we do this. And I have a lot of friends of mine that, people tried to put them away all their lives. And I said, we might as well get paid for telling the truth.
Definitely clearing the air and showing people this is actually what it was instead of, the game of everything.
I was born in Philadelphia, and in a neighborhood, not in the suburbs and big houses, but in a row home in the neighborhood.
Mm-hmm.
And we never locked our front door. Kids played in the street from sun up to sundown. No one ever bothered them. You could leave a baby pram outside. No one ever touched it. I mean, in the summertime, it was too hot to sleep indoors, so people used to sleep in the yard outside. They put mesh things around for the mosquitoes, and they slept outside. No one ever bothered anybody because the neighborhoods were run by people.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't think of committing certain crimes, man. It was not a good idea because you would forget about the cops. You had to answer to other people.
Got your own
If you
test.
tread on the wrong toes, man, you had a problem with it. So it was a whole different. It was, and there wasn't drive-by shootings, and there wasn't all this. I mean, I remember the first time I think I ever saw a gun in the street. It was a King Sussex playground in Southwest Philadelphia. A guy had a zip gun. It was a homemade zip gun. And it was the first gun I think I ever saw. I was about 12, 13 years old.
Wow.
So, and I understand that you also have connections, and you personally knew Jimmy Hoffa.
I knew Jimmy well. Yeah, Jimmy was a good guy. I like Jimmy a lot. And you look at this picture they did, the Irishman. That's total bullshit. That was total Hollywood taking advantage of conspiracy again, about stories that no one ever put an answer to. Yeah. And I knew Frank Sheeran very well. Frank was a driver for Hoffa, and Russell Buffalino was a great. I love Russell. Russell used to come watch me fight in Scranton. I knew Russell very well, and Billy Buffalino, who was Hoffa's lawyer, and so Jimmy was a man's man. Jimmy, you had to love Jimmy Hoffa. Jimmy would never ask you to do what he wouldn't do himself. And what they put him in jail for was total bullshit. That was Bobby Kennedy. To get him for $8,000. I mean, there was no pension fund until Hoffa. Hoffa created the pension fund. He took men who was working 16, 18 hours a day. Not only did they load and unload the trucks and drove them, they did everything, and he changed all that. He made driving trucks across the country a big time job. There's guys make 6 digits a year doing that. There's lawyers that quit practicing law just to be out in the sunshine driving a truck, and he did that. That was Hoffa. So to say that he stole $8,000 from the pension fund to fix his house, that was a crock of shit. He never would have done it, never had to do it. So when he went away, he thought he was only going in for a short time and coming right out. He thought the deal was going to be done. And he didn't realize that he backed the wrong guy for president. And he did a few years in there, But I remember the day he went away, trucks lined up all the way to Lewisburg, beeping their horns while he was driving in the cop car. They were taking him to jail, man. All these truckers were blasting their horns and stuff as he drove by. So Jimmy
helped him out so much.
Say what?
I said, yeah, they helped him out so much.
Yeah, Jimmy was. I like Jimmy a lot. I had a lot of respect, but he was his own worst enemy. When he came home, he created a headache for himself, and he's not buried anywhere. Nobody's ever going to find him. So, and Sheeran certainly didn't kill him, and Sheeran never killed Joey Gallo. That's a bunch of pop too. That's just Hollywood.
Wow.
So when you say he's not buried anywhere, you think that someone just knows where his remains are, and they're.
I know exactly where he's at. Yeah. I know where he's at. They're never going to find him.
That's crazy.
Never going
in one spot or multiple spots.
Well, let's say he was scattered around.
Yeah. I feel you. I got you.
So crazy, those types of things. Wow.
But he was Jimmy was a man's man. I like Jimmy. Jimmy was okay. And I went across country with him. We took care of him, made sure he was all right. Because we were doing union business in those days. And just traveling. And I watched him. He was so dynamic and so positive. And he created a huge union. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
One of the reasons why the Kennedys wanted him out of the way is because he controlled a big vote. He was like the vote machine, man. There were a lot of teamsters that voted.
Mm-hmm. He had a big influence.
Yeah, he was.
Yes.
So, kind of going back on your fighting career a little bit, we talked about you had multiple fights set up with Ali. What kind of happened with those falling through? Was it
First time we were supposed to fight was when he fought Norton, and I was California heavyweight champion. I was living in San Diego, and he called me on the phone one day and he said to me, "You got to do me a favor, man." I said, "Listen, I'll do a favor. Sign a contract to fight me." He said, "No, we can work that out, but you got to get." And I was fighting his brother Rockman, and he said, "You got to get my brother out of boxing, man. It's an embarrassment to me." And I said, "Rockman Ali's your brother?" He said, "Yeah." He said, "You got." So I figured, "Oh shit, I better go to the gym a couple of days." And I knocked Rockman out, and he never fought again. He wasn't a bad fighter. What he ran and grabbed too. He was just anyway. Thought he was his brother with speed, but he didn't have. Muhammad Ali, any sport he would have done, he would have been great. He was a great athlete, far enough. And so I knocked his brother out. We made a deal. We had a place down in the convention center. It was owned by a Canadian guy. We gave Ali 40% of everything. It was a great deal for him. And Norton was owned by two millionaires, Bob Byron and Art Rifkin. And they went to Chicago with a suitcase full of money and gave it to Herbert Muhammad. And Ali fought Norton. And he called me on the phone crying. He said, "I don't know how to tell you this." He said, "But I had no control over it." He said, "It's really a lousy deal, and I'm sorry, but, this is what it got to be, And I said, "Okay." So that fight was out. And then another time we were supposed to fight in Australia, and he fought Joe Bugner instead because of money or some other shit. I don't know. And then I beat Alvin Blue Lewis in Detroit, who was ranked number 2. And then Blue Lewis was getting ready to fight out. Blue Lewis lost to him in Ireland, 13 rounds he went. And then he came home and he beat Terrell and he beat another guy. And they called me in San Diego and said, "You want to fight out Blue Lewis?" And I said, "Can you get my license back?" Because they'd taken my license in San Diego for organized crime. And he said, "Yeah, no problem. We'll give you a license, no problem. You take the fight." I said, "Yeah." It was like on a 7-8 day notice, And I went up to Detroit, and I beat out Blue Lewis to death. I really beat him bad. And in fact, it was funny because we got paid, I think, something like $3,500 for the fight or something, which was unbelievable. But we made $95,000 betting every round around the ring. I had a guy bet every single round. The guy said, "Jack, realize you're in Detroit. This is his hometown." I said, "You bet every single round. I'm going to beat this guy from one end of the road to the other." And then I went up to camp to see Ali, and I just beat Blue Lewis. And I said, "Okay, Pappy, let's get this thing on. This guy's ranked 2 in the world." I said, "You know what? It's the second time I've done this. Let's play." And he said, "Yeah, man, we'll try and work something out here." And he sat down. He sat down, and we were into the boxing room in the back, and all the reporters were in the front room. And he shut the door and he said, "Listen, just come over and let's do it." We're kicking the door like we're fighting and all this shit. We're yelling at each other, and all these reporters are the other side thinking there's a big Donnybrook going on. He's a showman and a half. And he screamed, "You can't hit me, white boy. What do you think you're doing?" Back and forth and shit like that. And then we come out laughing like hell. And we sit down to have dinner, and he looked at me. He said, "Listen, if I give you a fight," he said, "are you really going to try and beat me?" I said, "Let me tell you something. For the first time in my career, I will go to camp like you do. And I will spend 8 weeks away from everything and everybody. And when I come in that ring, you better bring a gun with you." 2 steaks, please.
Oh, wow.
He was one. Ali was just an amazing individual, and if you ever met him one on one, he was a total different person. He was smart as a whip, boy.
So
Good guy.
I
had a lot of respect.
I have to ask. You said at the beginning that he's the reason you got into boxing. You said you could beat him. You both fought George Foreman. I got to ask, one-on-one, Jack O'Holler and Muhammad Ali, who wins?
That's a good
It would have been a hell of a fight. I mean, when I fought Foreman, I did it on a week's notice. And I walked into a punch, and I got up, and they stopped the fight right away, which really pissed me off. Because if you ever see the tape of that fight, I was beaten in the first couple of rounds. And he knew it too. George was very glad they stopped the fight. And George and I are good friends. And he gave me a list one day of the 10 hardest hitters that he ever fought. I think I was number 4.
Nice.
That was only his 15th professional fight, right?
Yeah.
That you guys went toe to toe, and you went 5 rounds, right?
Yeah. I walked into a punch, my own fault. I walked into a punch, but I got up, and that's what really pissed me off. They stopped the fight right away, and I said, "Whoa, wait a minute."
Wow.
But it is what it is,
Wow, that's the story, man. All from the boxing to the movies to this family.
I know, you lived like 9 people's lives.
Yes.
Yeah.
Each one is its
Exciting
own
life.
book. Like you could honestly put like volumes of this stuff together, from the boxing career, the family history, the acting, and the anecdotes and stories from that. Like
We're building a studio. I'll tell you what, we're building a studio in Nevada. 4 million square foot studio. It's going to be the biggest studio in the history of the business. Something that should have been done 30 years ago. And for the first time, we're going to put everything under one roof. And from films to music to streaming to television, we're going to have 110 sound stages. Everything under one roof. Every technology that there is in man's creation in the industry. And we're building a smart city right next to it that'll house 25,000 people who will work at the studio. So they only have to go 15 minutes to work.
Wow.
That's my kind of commute.
Yeah, I mean, if I'm doing a film today, I live in Redondo Beach. If I got to go to Warner Brothers to do a movie, I got a 2-hour drive each way.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So what we do is we get an apartment or something and stay up in town, depending on how your work schedule is. But it's, and technicians have a hard time. They got to drive way from different areas to get to work. So you're putting pressure on people. So to make it much cost effective to build this place like this, and then a smart city next to it, and they only have 15 minutes to go to work, boy, their heads are clear. You're going to get better volume of work out of them. And we're going to we have 2,000 acres of property, so we're going to put some old sets on the outside and build things so that guys doing little films like, from 500,000 up, they can have a place to do it without having to run all over the place, getting permits and shit like that. And the technology, we're going to have the greatest. I mean, I'm so looking forward to this.
I was going to say, how long has this project been in development? The studio.
It's amazing how fate works. My partner and I were going to build a place in LA. We had the greatest building to do it in Long Beach. And 2008, we had all the money, we had everything ready to go, and the world fell apart in 2008 financially. I mean, just poof, everything disappeared. And thank God, because in Nevada, we have a much better deal. We have a better tax deal. We have a better deal. I mean, the industry will move to Nevada. And when we put everything under one roof like that, we will have companies from all over the world wanting to come and play there. So it's going to be a much better. And like I said, you got 15 minutes to go to work. You have a great brand new city, and we'll have housing and everything, and we'll hold the mortgages for people, and we're going to make it affordable because all them people make 6 digits a year. If you got a buzzing studio that's buzzing, they're all going to work. And you just make it so applicable for them mentally, and put schools there for their children and everything. And all the problems in Las Vegas with with meth and all that shit, I will keep that out of there. And then we will put a ring around the rosy.
I get that.
Well,
And
my
I have,
kind of my last question for you is, with all your time in the industry and still being active, how has the industry changed in your opinion from when you began to current?
the people running the studios today are NBA guys. They don't have any, there's no depth. They run a studio for 3 or 4 years, rob a lot of money, and they leave. No one has any vision. Look at the property. Look what they're making. They're remaking everything.
Mm-hmm.
There's great scripts that are being handed in, and they pass them over because they don't know what they're doing. They really don't. And I mean, it's like we're getting ready to do this mini series. We're going to do films, but you can only put so much into a 2-hour deal. So we're going to do a mini series, turn it into a series. There will never be another series like this again because of what we're going to do. And the one genre, in other words, nobody has a crystal ball to tell you what's going to work in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
But one genre of films that never loses a dime are organized crime pictures. Even the spoofs that they do make money. You know,
The intrigue is just too high.
well, you get like they did a picture, a little picture. To me, it was a little story as far as organized crime is concerned. They did a picture a few years ago with Tom Hanks, Road to Perdition,
Mm-hmm.
about a hit guy that nobody ever heard of. A hit guy, and Paul Newman was in the picture. Tom Hanks was the hit guy, and he has a little kid. Picture did $1 billion
Wow.
because of the storyline of the
Wow.
kid.
Love mobster movies.
Yeah,
It's
mobster movies make money, and you know,
yes.
I mean, The Godfather. There's no telling. Nobody will ever tell you how much money they've made off of that.
It's just the allure. It's just the
But to do what we're going to do and to tell the truth, you see, you're talking about audiences, okay? So like the Amazon reviews of that old man, 90 years old, and a few other people like that.
Mhm.
When we do this, you'll have an audience of people from 90 to 16.
Mhm.
When I first wrote the book, I gave it to 4 high school kids to read. And they ran to the library and looked up some of the names and some of the incidences because they couldn't believe how real it sounded, and they wanted to find out. And it was it. And they came back to me and they said, "Why don't they teach us this in school?"
They like to block certain things out.
You know, because they don't teach you history in school of the country. There's 3 guys sitting here. Let me ask you a question. What was the very first prohibition in America?
The 20s?
No, alcohol.
Nope.
Well,
It was tea.
Nope.
oh, you said what?
1914.
I thought you said when.
You can look this up on the commute.
Mhm.
1914, they passed something called the Harrison Bill. The Harrison Bill gave Big Pharma power, created the drug business.
Oh,
The
wow.
Harrison Bill, before the Harrison Bill was put in place, you could buy marijuana across the counter. No one ever said a word. Cocaine was in Coca-Cola. You could buy opiates across the counter, and there was no addiction problems. Understand?
Wow.
So when the Harrison Act came in, that meant doctors had to script everything, gave Big Pharma their power,
Mhm.
and controlled over all drugs, prescription drugs. Yeah. Now here's your big problem. Women in that era, families never got divorced. They got married, they stayed married, they had 8 kids, 10 kids, and women they were housewives, they didn't go to work, and they were tired because they had all these kids and all this shit, you know, and doctors gave them speed to wake up in the morning, Valium to go to sleep at night. And all those drugs are going in their body,
Oh,
and they're
man.
going into babies' bodies. And addictions were being born.
Mhm.
And no one ever said a word about it. And then we went through the 60s with rock and roll, sex, drugs, and rock and roll and shit. And 1970, they came out with a documentary called The Littlest Junkie,
Mhm.
New York Hospital, because all these babies were coming in screaming and crying, and no one could figure out what was wrong. And one bright doctor said, those kids are going through withdrawal.
Yep.
They're going through drug withdrawal. Their bellies are cramping.
Wow.
You understand? And they only showed that documentary once. It was off the air because the same as you're having with the CBD oils and everything now, Big Pharma is fighting like crazy. They kept marijuana and everything under lock and key for so long, and it's all bullshit.
Mm-hmm.
Just like hemp, we're going to build this studio out of industrial hemp, which is the best building material you could ever have in your life.
Dude, it's gonna last forever.
Oh yeah, and it's better to work with. And if I can build a 1,200 square foot home, 2-bedroom, 2-bath, tile floors, inlet, all made out of hemp. I can build that house in 2 weeks' time for $20,000. And the temperature inside will stay between 69 and 72 continually.
So well insulated.
Yeah.
And hemp grows so fast.
And it goes every 90 days.
Yep. It just
and the material is, I mean, if you go on Amazon, there's 2,000 products that hemp is involved in. And when the Indians built their teepees, you ever see Indian pictures? And the teepees where they lived in these teepees in the snow and the blizzards and all that shit, because they were made out of hemp.
yeah.
So there's just so many, and it was pushed aside in the 20s and it's 1910 when steel and concrete pushed the hemp business aside.
I thought the oil companies helped do that as well.
Well, the oil business is going to change because the biggest pollutant that we have in the earth is a combustible engine.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and there's been alternative energies, but now they're starting to really come out with them. They're building cars with alternative energies, and they're putting stations in, and you're going to wind up getting 200 miles to a gallon of fuel for, you know, which, and the combustible engine. There was a guy, and this is a true story. The guy was an engineer for, I think, Chrysler, and he did a manual on a manifold that just took in more air because you blow 80% of a gallon of gas out your gas tank if you out the exhaust, because if you're not getting the right air mixture in there, you should be getting a couple hundred miles to a gallon of gas if you were mixing it right with the air. And when this guy put this manual out, they killed him and the manual disappeared.
Well, yeah, we got to keep buying gas.
You know what I mean?
200 miles to the gallon, we wouldn't be buying a lot of gas.
Well, then you wouldn't have the smog that we got, and you wouldn't have the pollution that we have.
And there wouldn't be as much crude oil digging. There would be a very big ripple effect.
Without a doubt. Without a doubt. There's much cleaner energy that's out there.
Yes, there is.
And, you know, Tesla started it, and they're picking it up. It's there. It's been there. They've got solar energy. They've got molecular energy. It's just, it's all coming. They have cars running on stuff, but you're going to have cars that'll drive themselves pretty soon.
Can't wait. Then I have to pay for an Uber. I can go home from the bar, and it could just drive me home, and everything will be okay.
Boom, boom. Just push a few buttons. Damn, thank you, man.
I can just sit in the back seat of the car, take me home. I've had too many, and it'll just drive me home.
And you're done. That's a wrap.
That's it, Jack. And then look at all that, your DUIs are getting loose. Oh, my God. You'll find another reason to lock you up.
Yeah.
Well, Jack, we appreciate your time and sitting down with us and talking to us, and we don't want to keep you up any longer. You've lived a fascinating life. Do you want to go ahead and tell our listeners where they can find you, plug anything you've got coming up, anything where we can find out more about you and your crazy life?
Just Google me. I mean,
the internet is a thing, right?
There it is.
No secrets
Now that's clout. Just Google me.
Yeah.
That's when you know you're taking it.
Anymore, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, thank you, sir. I appreciate you coming on.
It's my pleasure, guys. Listen,
Thank you, sir.
all you's in Phoenix? Every one of you's in
Yep,
Phoenix?
we're all in Phoenix. Yep.
Wow, God bless you. You like it over there? Arizona?
It's hot.
It's miserable.
It's hot.
I'll tell you a funny story. I was going to San Diego one time, and I'm flying from Boston, yeah? So they didn't have direct flights then. You had to stop in Phoenix. And then you went from Phoenix to San Diego.
Mm-hmm.
And when the plane stopped, and we had like an hour or so layover. So I was walking out through the thing, and you know those big glass doors in the front of the airport over there?
Yep.
I remember I'm walking out, and I was going to take a walk outside. They opened up the doors, and this hot air coming. I said, holy shit, man. It's like, take your breath away. I said, whoa, brother.
Yeah.
And
Then
then
I
I
walk back inside.
Turn right around, went right back in.
Yeah, but it's, it's a dry climate over there, so it's not too bad.
No,
Yeah.
it's still miserable.
It's still miserable, yeah.
It's miserable. We're all a bunch of morons for living here.
California's a place to be, son.
I mean, it's the quickest I can get down to Nevada. Once that place is done, the better. That's how I look at it.
Nevada's that's going to be a great store, boy. And there'll be jobs for a lot of people, but technology-wise, shit, forget about it.
I'm taking that driverless car straight there, so I'll stay tuned.
It's going to be a kick, man. I mean,
That's how my buddy Jack invited me.
Listen, you just get hold of me, man. We'll have 25,000 jobs. In fact, I did a deal with the university. They gave us the land because imagine having all the college graduates from all the classes that pertain to an entertainment industry. All these guys, I got a deal for them for the unions that while they're in college, every hour they intern on the set, it goes towards their hours in the union.
Nice.
By the time they graduate, they're union members.
That is
You know
cool.
what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Which for the union is great because they're college-educated kids making 6 digits a year. So how can you go wrong? So it's a good deal all the way across the board.
Sign me up.
Gotta get down
Great
there.
for the university, it's good.
Yes,
We're gonna
sir.
have a lot of fun.
Definitely. Looking forward to
If
seeing
you have fun, why not do it? You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Shit. All right, you guys have a great night, man.
Thank
You
you, sir.
too.
Have a good night.
Anytime
so
you
much.
want to play, just let me know.
Absolutely.
Oh, we will.
We'll definitely have you back on.
This was
Hope
the
your audience likes the show.
Absolutely.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Take care.
Thank
All right,
you.
guys, be well.
Yeah,
You
have a
too,
good night.
sir.
Oh, get out of here. They won't let me out. No, man. No. I'm innocent. Wait a minute.